The goals of language teaching. Language is not a genetic gift, it is a social gift. Learning a new language is becoming a member of the club, the community of speakers of that language. Hello and good day, everyone. I am Narisa and Mama Amelia, first year PhD in Applied Linguistics. Today, I am going to discuss with you the goals of language teaching. Allow me to begin first by defining what is a language. Linguists tend to provide definitions of language from their own theoretical perspectives. The way a linguist defines a language indicates the theoretical perspective that the linguist takes. The following definitions of language are quoted from John Lyon's Language and Linguistics. According to Sapir, language is purely human and non-instinctive method of communicating ideas, emotions, and desire by means of voluntarily produces symbols. According to Bloch and Traeger, a language is a system of arbitrary vocal symbols by means of which social group cooperates. Hall defines language as the institution whereby humans communicate and interact with each other by means of habitually used oral auditory symbols. Chomsky points out that a language is a set, finite or infinite, of sentences, each finite in length and constructed out of a finite set of elements. Conventionally, one meaning of language is political in the sense of Chapter 1, an abstract entity. A language belongs to a nation, whether German, French, English, or Chinese. An aphorism attributed to Uriel Winrich says that a language is a dialect with an army and a navy. According to ethnologue Lewis Simons and Fanag 2013, there are now 7,105 languages in the world, but there are only 193 countries that are members of the United Nations. Even in Europe, 50% of the citizens of the EU can hold a conversation in another language. That's according to Eurobarometer 2012. A country like the Cameroon has 2 national languages and 280 living languages. Most people use 4 or 5 languages in the course of a day. Probably more people in the world are like the typical Cameroonian than the typical English person. What about language teaching? Language teaching can be described as teaching people a foreign language so that they can understand and speak the language. Language teachers' goals for language teaching from different countries. We have Japan. Teachers in Japan target the language learning goal for their future, both seeking for jobs in the country and working abroad. However, most students take it for passing the entrance exams. Saudi Arabia. Saudi teachers try to make learners able to achieve the goals of each individual course in order for learners to be able to pass their courses. With an increasing emerging focus on the communicative aspect of teaching, which concerns learners' future for getting jobs or using it overseas. Poland. To allow students to communicate freely in most situations, including those of a professional nature, to be successful in national exams. China. Jobs and examinations, but nowadays going abroad to study is a hot objective. The following topics are the center of our discussion. First, the different roles of second language in people's lives, language in groups of speakers, the goals of language teaching. Let's begin with the different roles of second language in people's lives. We have bilingualism by choice, second language for religious use, official languages and L2 learning, multilingualism and L2 learning, and internationalism and second languages. Before we begin the topic on bilingualism by choice, let us know first the focusing questions and the keywords for this topic. Focusing questions: in the area where you live, how many languages are spoken, officially or actually? How many languages do you know? How many do you use in a day? Would you, as a parent, bring up children to speak two languages or not? Why? Keywords: we have elite bilingualism, either the decision by parents to bring up children through two languages or societies in which members of a ruling group speak a second language. Official language: the language or languages recognized by a country for official purposes. Multilingualism: countries or situations where more than one language is used for everyday purposes. Linguistic imperialism: the means by which a centered country dominates periphery countries by making them use its language. Polylingualism, as used in the CEFR 2008, refers to a person using another language in a country not their own. What is bilingualism? According to myth, bilingualism in itself has a bad effect on children, typified by Thompson 1952. There can be no doubt that the child reared in a bilingual environment is handicapped in his language growth. This view is still around. The advice in the pamphlets for parents Down syndrome children, I Can Talk, Streets 1976, reprinted 1991, is bilingual families. For any child this is confusing. One language should be the main one to avoid confusion. However, since the 1960s, research has pointed unequivocally to the advantages of bilingualism. Children who know a second language are better at separating semantic from phonetic aspect of words, at classifying objects, and at coming up with creative ideas. They also have sharper awareness of language. Bilingualism by choice. Some people speak two languages because their parents decided to bring them up bilingually in the home. This bilingualism is not forced on the parents by society or by the educational system, but it is their free choice. Often, one of the languages involved is the central language of the country, the other a local language spoken by one parent as a native. Sometimes, both parents speak a minority local language themselves but feel the majority central language should also be used at home. Choosing this type of bilingual education usually depends upon having money or upon being an expatriate. It is mostly a preserve of the middle classes. While a second language is often considered a problem in the education of lower status people, it is seen as a mark of distinction in those of higher status. So, bilingualism by choice mostly takes place outside the main educational context of ELTA teaching and varies according to the parents' wishes. Accounts of this will be found in the self-help manuals written for parents by Arnberg 1987 and by Edith Harding and Philip Riley 1986. Second language for religious use. Some people use a second language because of their religion. Latin functioned as a religious language of the Catholic Church. Muslims read the Quran in Arabic regardless of whether they live in an Arabic-speaking country like Saudi Arabia or in a multilingual country like Malaysia. Jews outside Israel continue to learn Hebrew so that they can pray in it and study the Bible and other sacred texts. In parts of India, Christianity is identified with English, in Ethiopia with Aramaic. Though the language of religious observance is specialized, it is nonetheless a form of L2 use for supercentral languages. Official languages and L2 learning. There are around 32 countries recognize more than one language for official purposes. But the fact that a country has several official languages does not mean that any individual person speaks more than one. The communities may be entirely separate. Switzerland has four languages: German, French, Italian, and Romansh, and uses Latin on its stamps. Helvetia. The Singapore government uses English, Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil and counts English as their first language. Maki 1967 claims that there are fewer bilingual people in the bilingual countries than there are in the so-called unilingual countries. Few Canadians, for instance, use both English and French in a daily life. Instead, the French and English speakers live predominantly in different parts of Canada, as do the German, French, and Italian speakers in Switzerland, and the French and the Flemish speakers in Belgium. It is necessary in many of these countries to teach speakers of one official language to use another official language. African-speaking civil servants in South Africa need English. Their English-speaking counterparts in Canada need French. This does not necessarily mean that each official language is equally favored. Few Swiss would bother to learn Romansh as a second language, nor does it mean that the official language learned is the version actually used in the country. In Switzerland, French-speaking children learn High German, not the Swiss German mostly spoken in the German-speaking areas, so that they can in a sense speak with Germans better than they can with their compatriots. Sometimes a language can become an official language with at first few of any native speakers. Hebrew was revived by a popular movement in Israel long before being adopted by the new state. Multilingualism and L2 learning. The past few decades seem to have accelerated movement of people from one country to another as refugees and immigrants looking for work. This has created a vast new multilingualism. According to the Eurydice network, Eurydice 2012 in Europe, 8% of pupils aged 15 say that at home they speak a language other than the language of instruction. While England uses one language for official purposes, a survey of London found that 32% of children spoke languages other than English at home, and that 300 different languages were spoken. Paulston, 1986, describes how immigrants to the United States from Greece and Italy become native speakers of English over 3 or 4 generations. In her view, such a shift from minority to majority language is prevented only when there are strong boundaries around the group, whether social or geographical, self-imposed, or when there is a clear separation in social use of the two languages, diglossia. Joshua Fishman, 1991, has described this intergenerational shift as a graded intergenerational disruption scale, abbreviated to GIDS. Internationalism and second languages. For many students, the second language has no real role within their own society. English is not learned in China because of its usefulness inside China. Instead, the second language is taught in the educational system because of the benefits it brings from outside. Such use of an international language does not necessarily entail any acceptance of the values of the society from which it originates. It means that a language may then be taught with the aim of promoting relationships with other countries that use it. So, a particular country, or indeed a particular individual, may decide to learn a second language for a purpose outside their own society, whether to do business with other countries, to gain access to a scientific literature, or to a cultural heritage, or to be able to work in other countries. Groups of language use, or that is part of languages and group of speakers. So we have focusing questions. Does your community use a single language or more than one? Which is preferable? Of all the groups to which you belong, family, religion, nation, etc., how important is the group of L1 speakers of second language users? What modern jobs necessarily require the use of second language? People speaking their native language. Some people use their native language exclusively. So, monolingual Londoners speak English with each other and potentially with anybody else who speaks English in the world. People speaking a second language with a majority. Some residents use a second language to communicate with the majority language group. Say, resident Bengalis in Tower Hamlets use English as a central language for their everyday contacts with other citizens of London. People historically from a particular community reacquiring its language as second language. The descendants of a particular cultural or ethnic group may want to learn its language, for instance, to talk to their parents who were first generation in commerce. People speaking an L2 either as short-term visitors to another country or to short-term visitors to their country. Some people are short-term visitors to another country, say tourists. English for tourism is no longer a matter of English-speaking tourists going to non-English-speaking countries or non-English-speaking tourists going to English-speaking countries, as we have seen. Some tourists may nevertheless try to learn the language of a country before visiting it. English people learning French to go to France. Japanese people learning Spanish to visit Spain. English for tourism is a theme in most EFL course books. Spanish for tourism, a key attraction for evening classes in England. People using an L2 with spouses, siblings, or friends. L2 users may, however, speak their second language with a small social group. People have often joked that the best way of learning a language is to marry someone who speaks it. Such married bilingual couples feel they are quite capable of passing for native speakers. People using an L2 internationally for specific functions. English lingua franca or DELF 2 belongs to a variety of group of speakers. One is made up of academics using the language for academic journals and conferences everywhere. Other groups are used specifically designed varieties of English like ACD Simplified Technical English, a carefully restricted English for technical writing. And of course, international business uses English regardless of first language, say Danish businessmen talking to Indians or Syrians on the phone. Students and teachers acquiring or conveying an education through a second language. In other words, a second language is the vehicle For education, more or less, regardless of its native speakers, except insofar as they can profit by teaching their language, within this general framework comes the elite bilingualism of children educated in multilingual schools. Pupils and teachers learning or teaching in L2 in school. Finally, children are taught a second language as part of the school curriculum. The classic foreign language situation, whether French in England or Spanish in Japan. Language in groups. So language users are members of many possible groups, ranging from the family up to the nation. Many groups are genuinely multilingual rather than monolingual. It is crucial to see L2 users as belonging to many groups and as being part of a new group of L2 users rather than as supplicants to join native speaker groups. So, teachers should be clear in their minds that they are usually teaching people how to use two languages, not how to use in one in isolation. The person who can speak two languages has the ability to communicate in two ways. The aim is not to produce L2 speakers who can only use languages when speaking to members of their own group. The goals of language teaching. The following topics are the center of discussion for the goals of language teaching. First, we have the central goals of teaching, international goals of teaching, and the individual goals of language teaching. Let us know first the focusing questions for this topic. Do you think people who come to live in another country should learn the majority language and forget their own? Adopt the majority language for some everyday purposes or try to keep both the majority language and their L1 going? What goals do you or your students have for their second language outside their own country? Careers, education, access to information, travel, other goals. We have the keywords: language maintenance and bilingual language teaching. Teaching to maintain or extend the minority local language within its own group. Submersion teaching, sink or swim form of teaching in which minority language children are put in majority language classes. We have the central goals of teaching. The central goals of language teaching are those that serve the needs of the society within itself, particularly the need for different groups to interact with each other. The educational system is one aspect of this. In some countries, education takes place almost exclusively through the central official language, English in England or French in France. Assimilationist language teaching. Teaching that expects people to give up their native language and to become speakers of the majority central language of the country. Transitional language teaching. Teaching that allows people to function in a central language without necessarily losing or devaluing the first language. Language maintenance and bilingual language teaching. Teaching to maintain or extend the minority local language within its own group. The aim of language maintenance or heritage teaching is to teach minority languages to speakers of that language. Many ethnic groups want to keep their own language alive in their children. Let's proceed to international goals of teaching. We have careers that require a second language. There are many careers in which knowledge of other language is important. The importance of language teaching is indeed to train people for the international business world. Higher education. Higher education through other language may either be in a country that uses it or resides in particular countries where it is not used. The importance for the student is not the language itself, but the knowledge and qualifications that are gained through the second language. Access to research and information. School syllabus encourages students to read and understand simple factual text for the main idea and supporting details. To keep up to date or to be well informed, it may be necessary to use English to support various careers that are not primarily based on language. Travel. The motivation behind many students' L2 learning is to travel abroad. The goal of travel is included under international goal as it involves contact with other countries. Individual goals of language teaching. First, we have understanding foreign cultures. Syllabus aims at instilling a broader perspective and an understanding of different cultures, fostering attitudes of respect for such ideas and the ability to live with people of different cultures. Regardless of the actual language that is being learned, it is often held to be beneficial for the students to understand a foreign culture for its own sake. The Japanese syllabus MEX 2011 aims to form the foundation of pupils' communication abilities through foreign languages while developing the understanding of languages and cultures through various experiences, fostering a positive attitude toward communication, and familiarizing pupils with the sounds and basic expressions of foreign languages. The UK National Curriculum 2014, on the other hand, believes learning a foreign language is a liberation from insularity and provides an opening to other cultures. A high-quality languages education should foster pupils' curiosity and deepen their understanding of the world. Understanding language itself. An educated person should know something of how language itself works as part of the human mind and of society. Cognitive training. The logical and reasoning powers of the mind were enhanced through a second language. This is supported by research which shows that children who speak two languages are more flexible at problem solving and are better able to distinguish form from meaning. General educational values. Just as sport is held to train children how in a team promotes leadership qualities, so L2 teaching can inculcate moral values. A general value that is often cited is the insight that L2 learning provides into the L1 and its culture. The Malaysian English Syllabus PPK 2003 demands teachers should also use materials that emphasize the principles of good citizenship, moral values, and the Malaysian way of life. From another angle, many people support autonomous language learning, where the learners take on the responsibility for themselves because this is in tune with democracy. As Leslie Dickinson 1987 puts it, a democratic society protects its democratic ideals through an educational process leading to independent individuals able to think for themselves. A general value that is often cited is the insight that L2 learning provides into the L1 and its culture. So, in the words of the UK National Curriculum DES 1990, helping the pupils by considering their own culture and comparing it with the cultures of the countries and communities where the target language is spoken. Learning L2 as an academic subject. Language can also be learned simply as another subject on the curriculum, another examination to be passed. The very learning of a second language can be an important mark of education, another form of elite bilingualism. Japanese teachers are not alone in complaining that they are enthralled to the examination system and cannot teach the English the students really need. The very learning of a second language can be an important mark of education, which is another form of elite bilingualism. French has this kind of status in Western Europe. German in Eastern Europe. Southern Poland and Hungary are two places where I have occasionally found German more useful than English. L to learning a social change. The goal seen so far in a sense accept the world as it is rather than trying to change it. The student as an individual is expected to conform to their society, but education and L2 teaching can also be seen as a vehicle of social change. According to Paulo Freire, 1972, the way out of the perpetual conflict between oppressor and oppressed is through problem-posing dialogues between teachers and students which make both more aware of the important issues in their lives and their solutions. Language teaching on a Freirean model accepts that authentic education is not carried out by A for B or by A about B, but rather by A with B mediated by the world, giving rise to views or opinions about it. Language teaching can go beyond accepting the values of the existing world to make it better. While the Freirean approach is included here under individual goals because of its liberating effect on the individual, it may well deserve a category all of its own goals for changing society. Language teaching as political action. And that's the end of my discussion. Thank you very much.